My name is Hovanessian. I'm a corporate advisor, but I'm also a property developer and a property investor, and I have been doing this for over 30 years. The scenario that required me to borrow funds from a company like Assetline was a situation where a well-acquired block of land was to be developed, and I could not get the funds from a bank under the normal or rather more restricted banking requirements today. I was able to approach Assetline through the help of a friend who had introduced me to them, and we were able to come to an agreement on the transaction, which certainly benefited me, and I was able to complete my acquisition and get the funding sufficiently to do what I wanted to do. I found Assetline to be very cooperative. They understood my position, they understood the commercial realities, and they were able to come to my assistance very quickly. They individually, the directors went and saw the property, apart from an independent valuation. They asked a lot of questions, but they were quite satisfied and were able to act very quickly. Well, if the bank approved it at all, I suspect it would take about 3 months before a transaction would be completed from start to finish. If I were to wait for 3 months, or in fact even 2 months in this particular case, I would have lost the transaction. I would have lost the substantial profit I made out of the transaction. In my circumstances, and many others that I have helped and introduced or referred to Assetline, I think it made substantial sense to go with Assetline because it provided what I needed, it allowed me to complete my transaction in time, and it helped me make a reasonable amount of profit. Obviously, a company like Assetline, acting so quickly, would have charges that were higher than normal market rates. Their fees, establishment fees or valuation fees, and their interest rates were higher. But relative to the amount of profit I expected to make, it was really irrelevant. Might have been an extra $100,000 overall, but it's much better to pay that money than to lose, for example, on a $4 million transaction. As a businessman, I look at the commercial reality of any transaction and weigh up the cost against the risk, against the profit. And in the case of borrowings from a company like Assetline, I was quite happy to pay the additional cost. I must say, dealing with the executives at Assetline, Steve Baynard and Nick Raffaelli in particular, who perhaps was involved largely in my transaction, was a breeze. They understood my position. They came to see the property. They looked at my feasibility. They were able to cut through the chase and see exactly what my, I guess, aim was with the transaction, and were able to come to the party relatively quickly. It was actually quite a delight to work with people who understood commercial realities, but at the same time were able to assist in the way they did. For me, the timeline in getting the transaction completed was most important. If I was not able to meet the timeline, I would have lost on the transaction, I would have lost on the property, and I would have lost on the substantial profit that I stood to make. The speed with which they acted was substantially shorter than any bank would have been able to do. I was able to actually do my transaction within 2 weeks, whereas with a bank it would have taken about 3 months, if I even got approval from the bank. I must say that the transaction took overall about 6 months to complete. That is, to get the financing done, and then reach to the end of the term of the loan and repay it was about a period of 6 to 7 months. I was able to lock in my profit in that time. And when I look back at the transaction even today, after almost 18 months or 2 years after the transaction is completed, I am really quite happy to have paid the extra funds that I paid in securing the debt. It was a couple of percent above normal market rates, in fact maybe more than that. And there were establishment fees, and there were application fees, and of course legal fees. But the additional expense was really negligible relative to what I would have made or what I did make in the transaction. After a while, it didn't even come into the equation. I was quite happy to have paid it, and I have since referred other clients to Assetline. I have since borrowed money from Assetline for 2 or 3 other transactions.